Hello and welcome to the Blueprint collaboration interviews at Arper. Today I'm talking to somebody who's known for his imaginative solution to design problems. This is the person responsible for such diverse projects as the London Routemaster bus update, the 2012 London Olympics Cauldron, the Zeitz Mocker Museum in Cape Town, and most recently an up-and-coming The Vessel in Manhattan. Today I'm talking to Thomas Heatherwick.
I think I'm actually slightly allergic to the word collaboration because I think that it's a word that feels like something that everyone should say they do, because it sort of goes with the politics of our time. And though in reality, I mean, my real interest is in trying to do exceptional projects. And in order to do that, it is essential for me to work with many, many people. And that's the only way I know to do good projects. It's the only way I know. It's my disability. And I remember the images that were portrayed to me of fantastic design work having been sort of led by these lone geniuses. And I remember feeling when I was studying, sitting there thinking, what's wrong with me? I don't work like that. And for me, I found that the design process came alive when working with others. And that's quite different than the educational system, where each student is assessed on their own performance and they have their own project and they do their own thing individually. Even though the projects themselves might be so large and complex, you could really argue that they should be a broader group of people working together to achieve such a complex outcome. From my point of view, I knew that I had this funny disability at the Royal College of Art when I was there, that these students are all individually sitting there by themselves. I could design, but it was a slow, very plodding process when it was just in you. And I remember there was a brilliant structural engineer called Ron Packman who used to come in and teach as a visiting tutor. And he would come in and you'd sit with him and the lights went on, the flowers grew. In the conversation with him, suddenly design wasn't in you, and it wasn't in him, it was between you, it was in that space. And I knew that I had this thing that designing for me was a collective activity, and that my role would be to maybe be trusted to lead the direction of that conversation and in exchange, but it was essential. And so that the natural extension as you work on larger and larger projects, where there's no question that you can't have the expertise, and there's hundreds of different expertises needed, unwittingly I found that my disability worked for more complex architectural projects and pieces of city thinking. I cherish that process that we've evolved, and the last 2 decades or so have been refining the mechanism of that conversation and growing system. And in a sense, that system that we've evolved through multiple conversations with multiple collaborators, that's strongly steered by a very small handful of people, involves many, many people. I'm sure there are people maybe in this time who actually don't want to collaborate and don't work better when they collaborate, and feel video like this makes them feel under pressure. They should say they collaborate all the time when it's not how they work. But it's in our studio, it was necessary to do the kinds of projects that we were interested in with the people that we had. And in a way, the growing of the studio team has been influenced by finding people who don't just have talent in raw artistic terms and technical terms, but also where part of their skill is their emotional intelligence to work with others and hopefully bring the best out of others. And it's easily said, very hard to really do on a long-term basis, but that's what we've been trying to evolve a system to do. The design process in the studio involves a lot of people, but I think maybe the best way to describe it, how we're seeing it, is that we're problem solving. And in the middle of that is a group leader, a project leader, and myself. And so the three of us are responsible for a project that might take 1 year if it's small and quick, or 12 years, as in the case of Singapore's Changi Airport that we're just really getting going on now. But that is a collection of problems of all different scales and of all different types. And it's really true that if you can get a group of people all seeing something as a problem to solve, and acknowledge when you think you're stuck, and know when to pull back and throw back to others, that organism of a team, people love to solve problems. And the challenge is defining what your problem is all the time. And maybe it sounds negative to describe the magic of a design process as problem solving, but by framing the issues as problems, I find that it takes out a kind of silly emotional dimension, and a problem can be about how a building performs environmentally, but it can also be how somebody will feel going to that. They're all, to us, sort of equal problems to solve. And so, in effect, myself, the group leader, and the project leader are chairing whatever rambling, shambling, ludicrous exploration, research, discussions, dead ends that we're going to go through, in a way that core of those three people are going to need to be trusted by the broader group and harness that broader group together, and also know when we still haven't got the right, when we're not even solving the right thing. The Coal Drops project that we are just finishing now in King's Cross originally was a project asking for 2 bridges to connect together 2 warehouses with these railway viaducts, raised levels, where trains used to drop coal onto the carts pulled by horses to drop coal into the coal holes of London. But our experience of working with retail environments knew that the right solution, what they really meant was make this a vibrant place, which will have a long potential sustainable life and makes a great public space that can bring people together. Once we reframed it as that, our response was to say the solution isn't 2 fancy bridges. In fact, the solution is very calm, almost invisible bridges, because you need flow, because these 2 buildings are the wrong distance apart for conventional retail thinking, and actually we need another floor on the building because there isn't enough intensity and there's no heart. And in King's Cross, there I'm quite, I suppose, maybe I've heard people be so negative about city planners before. We presented to the planners, and there was one fantastic urban designer, the urban design lead from Camden Council called Ed Jarvis, who just sort of went and looked, and we were there sort of thinking, why is he not persuaded by this? And he made some key observations that we went away and reflected on, and meant that we profoundly redesigned how we could manifest that additional floor. There are collaborations which are with people, but there are also collaborations with existing structures. And the Zeitz-Mocker Museum in the grain silo, there alongside you was this extraordinary piece of infrastructure that had been the tallest building in sub-Saharan Africa for half a century, made from 100 tubes. And you're there thinking, what do we do? How do we handle this? Are we knocking this down? But it's got so much character. All the new buildings around don't, because new buildings tend to be too shiny, too smooth, and too silicon sealant-y. And so in a way, there was a tension and a frisson of trying to work out how we could harness, in effect, the ideas that it had within it with also the other team members, historians who were alongside us. And then ultimately, one of the critical collaborators was also a stone carver who was from Cape Town and called Johan, who came and was involved because 100-year-old concrete is when concrete achieves full chemical hardness at approximately a century, and the building was sort of 95 years old. And so this was a really challenging thing to carve an incredibly complex shape out of, with very sharp angles on edges. And that collaboration with the different craftsmen who were involved, some of whom only spoke Xhosa, and that process was just at the most physical and problem solving together. And there's an intense excitement in that side of problem solving as much as the conceiving and rethinking and reevaluating as you tally up the budget you have available to make a project, the aspirations and the ingenuity. One of the best collaborations we've ever worked on was on an enormous project, 4.5 million square foot, on the Bund, the most sort of viewed city centre location in Shanghai. And the studio originally was commissioned to develop a design for this site. And the project was so big, I contacted my friends, two of the senior partners at Foster & Partners, Gerard Evenden and David Nelson, and asked them if they would be interested to work together. And so before we had gone too far or developed any design ideas, we agreed together that we would design it completely together, and we would take equal credit, equal blame, and what if we did this project together? And I think we've been friends for a while, and in fact Foster commissioned the studio to do a design for a mosque within the Masdar project that it was developing a decade or so ago. And we knew that we were different but shared also many values, and the best collaborations, there's a mutual curiosity. And it was great. I mean, we formed a combined team. The project took just over 4 years, and we had a team of 45 people in a space that wasn't the studio's conventional space or Foster's conventional space. And we had a huge amount of work to do, and we would come together and have reviews together. And we never disagreed on any design issue on the project, and because we were both there. I mean, the team at Foster's are collaborators. They have to be, and the scale of that organisation has meant that's how they have developed. And so it was a real pleasure together going on that trip where you don't know what the answer is and you're exploring together. The collaborative way of working that we've evolved in the studio grew from me trying to work out the best way for me to work. You know, so in a sense, that social, broad, inclusive thing was started from a totally selfish point of view in terms of how can I best have a chance of doing meaningful work. And that grew from being alone, very much alone with design problems when the studio began, and having people who assisted me and helped me, and I didn't have the tools, which is a fashionable way to say I didn't know how to bring others in so well. And there were one or two people who you could work with, such as an engineer who taught me originally, but I also found that your collaborators don't need to be of the same background as yourself. In fact, a good collaborator doesn't even need to be a designer or an architect or a city planner or an engineer. You can find that a really useful exchange can grow if you are open and with somebody who's smart and has passion and intelligence.